क्या तुम कम्युनिस्ट हो? नहीं मैडम, मैं कार्टूनिस्ट हूँ. That was a quote from the 1955 film Mr. and Mrs. 55, directed by Guru Dutt, written by Abrar Alvi, starring Madhubala, Lalita Pawar, Guru Dutt himself, Johnny Walker, and a host of other actors who we will come to. My name is Abbas. This is Has It Aged Well? Today I am alone in the host chair. My co-host Urjita is not with me. She's out there planning and preparing for a 1-hour show that she's doing. So please check that out. But I am very excited today because in the studio to talk about Mr. and Mrs. 55 with us is someone who I've been wanting to have. Like, she's the ideal guest if you're doing a show on cinema and film. She, I think, is one of the primary and premium chroniclers of Hindi cinema or Indian cinema writing today. She's written more than 20 books on cinema, and I've read a few of them and they are really extraordinary. She still curates the channel for Film Season, and she's a name who, if you're into cinema, Indian cinema, you've definitely heard. It's an honor and a privilege to have on Has It Aged Well, Nasreen Munni Kabir. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Has It Aged Well.
Thank you so much, Abbas. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is all mine. We did an episode on Cyrus Says with you where we spoke about your journey and how you got into film and got into filmmaking and talking about writing about films. Today we're talking about Mr. and Mrs. 55, which is a Guru Dutt film. Guru Dutt, if I may say so, is one of your specialities.
Yes, absolutely.
You have written multiple books on him, one of which is right here on our table. So, Mr. and Mrs. 55 was actually one of, like, when we reached out to you, it was one of your choices. I'll be honest, yesterday was the first time I watched the film. And for me, again, by the way, I should just first of all get this out of the way. I'm 36. So the era of the 50s and 60s is still a little, I've not ventured into that era, the cinema of that era as much as some of the experts have. So when it comes to Guru Dutt, I think 3 films are the ones which are spoken about a lot. One is, of course, Pyasa, which I've seen multiple times. The other is Kagaz Ke Phool. And then there is Sahib Bibi aur Ghulam. Mr. and Mrs. 55 predates all of them. It's even made before Pyasa. What's the first memory you have of watching this film? Do you remember watching this film for the first time? What's the effect it has had on you?
I think, first of all, as you said, Abbas, it is definitely one of my favorite films of Guru Dutt's.
Right.
And some days I prefer it even to Pyasa.
Okay.
Why? Because it's a very accomplished film, and it also shows that Guru Dutt was a total filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
He could make light comedies, he could make psychological dramas and intense films like Pyasa.
Right.
And you see a great range. And I think in terms of acting, he's amazingly charming in the film as a very kind of a Hollywoodian hero. In many ways, I think Mr. and Mrs. 55 is one of the most Hollywood films of his career.
Okay.
Because it has that light, breezy touch to it, like the comedies with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. You know, our films of that era, of the 50s, they always had these romantic films, love between different classes, and how love actually triumphs. And in the middle, there's a lot of comedy, and strange circumstances the plot keeps changing and twisting. So Mr. and Mrs. 55 has many elements to it.
That's the other thing. I mean, for whatever reason, I think in popular consciousness today, Guru Dutt is always seen as this king of tragedy because it's like he made really serious films and most of his heroes were like tragic heroes. But Mr. and Mrs. 55, like you said, at least for the first 2/3 of the film, is very much a playful romantic comedy, and he's playing this down on his luck cartoonist. Actually, I just wanted to read out the synopsis of the film from Google. It's a very funny premise. Sita Devi, a feminist, arranges a fake marriage for her niece Anita, which would restore her freedom. However, with time, Anita learns the true meaning of marriage after she falls for her husband. So, of course, the gender politics and the feminism of this film, seen from a 2024 lens, of course, is very different from how it would have been in 1955. The film is 69 years old. I should say this is officially the oldest film we have covered now. Before this, it was Amitabh Bachchan's Dawn, which was 1979. So we were quite far away even from there. But yeah, this playfulness, how how much time had it been since Guru Dutt had been making films when he made Mr. and Mrs. 55?
Well, he started in 1951 with
Right.
Bazi. So this is like 4 years later,
Right,
55.
right.
And you can see what you see in a good filmmaker is his capacity of making different types of films.
Right.
So he'd make adventure films, romantic films, light comedy films, satire,
Right.
and then darker and darker films. I think after Pyasa, I would say Pyasa and Kagaz Ki Phool was very much, people have assumed it is very much his story.
Correct.
In a way it is, and in a way it isn't. Just as much as Mr. and Mrs. 55 isn't him. We have to think of people as a whole. I mean, it's a holistic situation. They are many things. You are many things. Some days
Right.
you're feeling low, some days you're feeling high.
Right.
And this you can find in Guru Dutt's work. He has a totally a great understanding of comedy.
Right.
And if you see how he directs Johnny Walker,
Right.
you can say that clearly this man understands
Yeah,
comedy.
yeah.
Otherwise, he would not have Johnny Walker in the film. So he always had this foil. In Kagaz Ke Phool, there's Johnny Walker. In Pyasa, there's Johnny Walker.
Yes.
So Johnny Walker is the balance to the darker, more brooding hero.
Right.
So that means he's also Guru Dutt.
Right.
So you can't say that Johnny Walker isn't Guru Dutt
Right.
because he's part of the film.
Right.
And you have in Sahib Bibi Ghulam, you also have a certain amount of humor. And so therefore you have to say that the Bhutnath character sometimes is a bit funny. He has funny ways of behaving and so on. So we have to see it as that. Now, the premise of your show is about whether films date.
Yes.
This is a big question because how do you and when do you start judging a film?
Right.
I think if you're looking back at a film, you have to judge it in its time.
Okay.
Because if you see Citizen Kane and you say Citizen Kane and the whole idea of journalism and newspapers and so on, it may be dated, it may not be dated, but he made it at a certain time. Orson
Right.
Welles made it then.
Right.
Mr. and Mrs. 55 was actually based on Abrar Alvi's stage play
Okay.
called Modern Marriage.
Okay.
So in which there was the whole question of the traditional and the modern. And Mr. and Mrs. 55 is modern not just as much as the aunt is saying that you need to access your father's will, and the
Right.
will stipulates that she must be married in order to become
inherit.
take the money, to
Yeah,
inherit
yeah,
the money. So they basically buy someone who is Guru Dutt to
Right.
fulfill that role. So
Yes.
once she would be married, she'd get the will sanctioned or whatever the word is.
Yeah, and
get
it's very
the money.
clearly a business transaction because
It's
the
a
conditions are
business
you
transaction.
won't meet her,
You won't meet her and
Yes.
you will be divorced. But
Yes.
it also, you won't meet her means you won't consummate the marriage.
Correct, yes.
So the modern marriage is to buy the husband
Right.
and to get him to divorce you. So it's a
Right.
contract
Right.
wedding. So that in itself is very modern. And for 55, you wouldn't see many films where that's happening. The downside is that when you look at the film, what is dated is the aunt Sita Devi, played by Lalita Pawar, her attitude towards women and feminism. And there's a scene with the traditional wife, the daughter,
Yes.
sister-in-law
Yes.
of Guru Dutt character,
Yeah.
who is called Preetam.
Yes.
She is the old way of
Right.
being the wife.
Right.
So you have these various kinds of presentation of how women are seen.
Right.
And what is dated the most is the attitude towards women.
Right. So I want to pick your brain about the Lalita Pawar character. The flaw, if you want to put it that way, in the film, I thought, was that the Lalita Pawar character is supposed to be progressive because in the first few scenes, you see she is the one who's fighting for women. She gets that men mistreat women and we have to fight against it, and she stands up for that. And yet she's framed as the vamp, the villain of the film, right? Do you think that's where the fault lies, that one character we're supposed to perceive as progressive is actually the villain of the film?
Yes, that is where the problem is.
Right.
Because on one hand, she's saying that she's on the side of women and they should not be dependent on men. That's
Right.
why she wants him, the niece, Anita, played by Madhubala, to marry and divorce. Because she doesn't want her to be married. And she realizes the brother, that's Anita's father, who has in fact left the money, has understood the character of Sita Devi Devi and would not allow Anita to marry. And that is why he says you can only inherit if you marry. So there is the feeling the brother knew that this sister, Lalita Pawar, was very much against men because whatever reason, he knew it.
Right.
But all that is done in a way that she's seen as the obstacle that has to be overcome, but it's her thinking that has to be overcome because they balance that off with the traditional wife. The traditional wife sings the glories of marriage and even says, oh, well, if he wants to beat you sometimes, that's okay too, and stuff like that.
That was the one part, that one scene where I cringed because I was like, she directly asks him ke kabhi तुम्हारे ऊपर हाथ उठाता है, and her response is to the effect of, well, if the whole is lovely, then some chinks in the armor can be forgiven.
But then, Abbas, I haven't seen the film Animal, but people have talked about the scene where apparently the character says to the girl, you must lick my boots or something like that.
Yes.
Now that is what, 2024.
Right,
so we mustn't always assume that the past was archaic in his thinking. Today too there are films in which certain things are said. I have no opinion about Animal because I haven't seen it, but I think licking one's boots is also as bad as a suggestion even of domestic violence.
Right. So but then would you say the Lalita Pawar character in the film, then does that make her a bad feminist?
It makes her a confused feminist. More than a bad feminist. She's got the right thing in as much as she wants to fight for women's rights. But the question is that she goes about it without realizing that there are lots of emotions involved. And the film is all about emotions in the end. And in the end, what is very interesting is even the character of Guru Dutt is called Pritam. Now that's a name that is now archaic. But the fact is it is all about love. And so basically it is a tussle between love, contract marriages, and what is it to be feminine, modern, and Indian in the 50s. So it is dated Mr. and Mrs. 55. Now, Abrar Alvi, when I had interviewed him, he talked about his play. And he also said that the twist, which was this contract marriage, came from a Betty Davis film. Now, I've not been able to find the title of that film, but it must have been a film from the 40s or early 50s, in which the twist was she had to marry in order to maintain her visa to live in America, or the man had to marry. But so it was a twist of that circumstances compel you to get married. So that was the twist in Mr. and Mrs. 55.
There's a similar premise for a Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds film called The Proposal, I think, where she's Canadian and he's American. So to keep her American visa, she has to get married, something along those lines.
So it could very well be based on this Betty Davis film. So we have to try and do some research. So Abrar Alvi is a consistent collaborator of Guru Dutt. I think he's also written a book about Guru Dutt. Tell me something about him. And while we were coming on our way to the studio, you said that the filmmakers of the 40s and 50s had this idea that they used to hire scriptwriters, and scriptwriters were almost stars unto themselves in that era. So tell us something about, in general, the scriptwriters and Abrar Alvi also. What happened was that a lot of people who came to Bombay did not speak Urdu very well. So the films were in Urdu or Hindustani. So Guru Dutt was was Konkani speaking and English speaking and Hindi speaking, but not enough to write dialogue. So he would write the screenplay and Abrar Alvi would write the dialogue. And you will find this combination with many directors. You will find Raj Kapoor relied on K. Abbas, another Urdu writer, to write his dialogue. And then you had Rajendra Singh Bedi, who would write the dialogue for the screenplays of Bimal Roy. And Wajahat Mirza, who was a wonderful Urdu writer, would write for Mehboob Khan. So you had the fact that just like the actor and the playback singer became two because of their various talents, so the director and the writer became two. And you'll find even the 70s why did they rely on Salim Javed? Because the writers were not writers. I mean, the directors were not writers. But there was also the language. Bimal Roy's Hindustani wouldn't have been good enough, and neither did Guru Dutt. Many people have said Guru Dutt's Urdu was not good enough to write the dialogue. And so therefore that combination happened. Abrar Alvi apparently came to Bombay wanting to be an actor.
Like everybody else.
Like everybody else. And that he had a cousin called Jaywant who was working in a film called Bars, and he went on the set. And they were not happy about a scene that was going to be shot, because in those days people used to say, and I'm sure it's true, that many of the dialogues were written on the set. So when he came along, Abrar Saab came along, and there was some dialogue that the director wasn't happy with or whatever, so he wrote some scenes, and then Guru Dutt noticed it and asked him from Aar Paar. So, but Abrar Alvi's writing is actually bringing a lot of regional flavor, a city flavor, the vocabulary. Now, if you look at Mr. and Mrs. 55, the character that, for example, Johnny Walker plays, he is a Parsi. And is it in... yes, he's a Christian in that one.
He's a Christian, yes.
But in Aar Paar, he's Parsi. And so he will speak the Hindi like Parsi speak in Aar Paar.
In fact, even in Pyasa, Tun Tun plays the Catholic landlady.
And her language is different.
Her language is different. And in fact, when the language that Johnny Walker speaks in this film, the film is almost 70 years old, but I was like, you will find people speaking like this on the street today, right? So that colloquial nature of Bombay. And in fact, towards the end of the film, there's also this one line which again has been doing the rounds of social media, where Pritam says he's going back to Delhi, and then Johnny Walker asks him, "Mumbai kab वापस आओगे?" And he says, "के बादशाहों के शहर में रहने के बाद, like who will come back to the city of traders after going to the city of that emperors built." So I actually wanted to come back. So why do you think this the importance of the writer faded away in Hindi cinema?
It didn't fade away entirely. I think into the 90s, the directors like Adi Chopra or Karan Johar were starting to write their own scripts. So then you had that combination again of writer-director. However, look at the 70s. It was Salim Javed. So basically, the writer was always very important. In the 50s, people who were knowledgeable about the films heard about Abrar Alvi, or Abbas Saab was very well known as a journalist. But the writer never got equal bill on the posters. If you look at Guru Dutt's posters, you will not see Abrar Alvi's name.
Very prominent.
However, when we spoke to Javed Saab, he said and there was another writer, Mulk Rajanand, who had his name on the poster. And after that was Salim Javed. So really, it took a long time for the world to recognize. It was like, I don't know if you remember, but on All India Radio, it was Sahir Saab who fought that the names of the lyricists be announced, not just the composer. So in the same way, the writer did not get the recognition. And even today, I mean, how many writers have that recognition?
In fact, even as recently as I think a couple of years ago, Spotify would only display the names of the singers, and then I think lyricists fought for it that their credit should also be included in the song titles. So I think
it's like the front person matters most, so the star matters most, and then after that is the director. But very honestly, these combination of writers made also the 50s the golden era, because they had a great talent to write. And anyone watching Mr. and Mrs. 55, as you say, will be just struck by how modern the language is, and how modern the premise is, and how modern the various scenes are. And I thought it was really very funny when Madhubala is dying to marry this tennis player Ramesh, and Ramesh keeps trying to avoid her no matter what's happening.
I mean, first of all, who would avoid Madhubala? If Madhubala wants to be your girlfriend, you just say yes. I don't know why.
But anyway, she even tells him, "Look, I'm going to inherit lots of money." So he basically says, "Who cares?" So they're very, very good twists and turns. It's the most delightful film. Honestly, if people give it a chance, it's one of the most delightful films of Guru Dutt and of the 50s.
When you were mentioning that the dialogues were written on set, I remember we had a couple of weeks ago, we had Manoj Bajpayee on Cyrus's show, and we were talking about Satya, and he said even until Satya, the thing was like you never knew what locations you would get to shoot at. So many a times he would get a call from Ram Gopal Verma saying, "Okay, today we are shooting on this at this bridge in Malad," and they would turn up on the set, and then Anurag Kashyap would literally write the lines on set to what to say. So I think even till the late 90s that trend did not go away.
But I must tell you, the scene in which they filmed the song Thandi Hawa, beautiful, that was filmed at Mahatma Gandhi swimming pool.
Okay.
In Shivaji Park.
Okay.
And so when I did the documentary on him, we went back there and we filmed the swimming pool today and then cut it between that and the scene in the film.
Is it still functioning, the swimming pool?
Absolutely.
Oh, it is?
And it has there's a whole center behind it, and Allah Rakhaji's son, Fazal, he conducts tabla classes in one of the houses near the swimming pool. Yes, it's functioning, absolutely functioning.
Oh, nice.
And we have to mention the songs.
Right.
Majru Saab's songs are just beautiful.
Yes.
And obviously the music of O.P.
Nair, yes.
Delightful. And you can hear these composers did something very interesting in their films, is that they would often write a very beautiful score for the background. Not always them, it was often their arranger who would be composing those background tunes. But those tunes became full tunes in the next film. And you can see Arpar, some of the music in Arpar and some of the music background in Mr. 55. The songs are absolutely beautiful. The way he films them are just wonderful.
The most famous one, of course, is Jaane Kaha Mera Jigar Gaya Ji, I think, which we've all grown up listening to, which is filmed on Johnny Walker and this typist that he's trying to flirt with.
Yes.
Her name
is, I think, Noor.
Noor, yes.
I think he married her.
Johnny really?
I think he's, if I'm not mistaken, Noor was Shakila's sister, and I believe he married Johnny Walker. You could check, but I'm pretty sure.
We'll do that. I wanted to also mention that, that Madhubala character. But by the way, I didn't know that, I was reading somewhere that Madhubala was considered box office poison at this time, which is impossible for me to think to, because when I think of Madhubala, I think of successful films and big films and graceful films. But I think this was the one that was a turning point which through which Madhubala gained fame, and then she went on to deliver a lot of hits after this. But I was coming to the fact that you spoke about the class difference, right? And straight off the bat, we told that Pritam is a cartoonist, and within the first few seconds, he literally faints because of hunger. Like, the doctor literally says that his only medicine is that he needs to be fed twice a day. Yes. As long as you do that, he'll be fine. And then you contrast that with the Madhubala character who's going to squash matches and swimming pool clubs and all of this. And there are times where she's dressed in a very modern way, wearing sunglasses. And I was thinking, like, this is barely 8 years after independence, right? So, this stock of characters, the Lalita Pawar, Madhubala coterie of people, they are supposed to be the wealthy, rich people, right? And Guru Dutt's character is supposed to be the struggling cartoonist.
It's a struggling artist.
Struggling artist,
And in Pyasa, he's struggling artist, but in a much darker form.
Yeah, exactly.
But you'll see she's supposed to be a millionairess.
Right.
So not just the upper middle class, but she was really the rich.
Right.
And they live in a kind of very westernized way. She's wearing dresses.
Yes.
She's wearing sunglasses. She goes to the swimming pool. She goes and watches tennis. All these things are associated with a westernized way of living.
Right.
So when she encounters the sister-in-law, there is this clash of the modern and the traditional.
Yes. Is that why she's irked when she thinks that Guru Dutt is a communist? Because
that's the aunt who gets.
Yes.
The aunt?
But
yes.
She's afraid that the wealth will be distributed.
And she's not used to being answered back to.
Right.
So whenever he answers her back, she looks completely angry.
Right.
So she's... and there's a wonderful scene in Mr. and Mrs. 55 in which the cartoonist, Pritam, he's drawing a cartoon. And they say, actually, it is the cartoons and the hand is R.K. Lakshman.
Lakshman, yes.
Now, that's extraordinary.
Yes.
That Guru Dutt would have the wit to go and get the best cartoonist to do that.
Yes.
And that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And how he would... I would say that it has a lightness of touch. And there are moments that you will not find as witty and as... It was a witty film. And Indian cinema goes on comedy more than wit.
Right.
And wit comes through repartees and dialogue exchanges.
Right.
And this film is full of them.
Right.
You will not be disappointed.
Okay.
And then also the way he cuts between time and space. There's a lovely scene in which Madhubala is near the end of the film is very sad because she's been separated from Pritam, and she's lying in the one room, and on the radio there is a song going on, Geeta Dutt's song, Pritam Aan Milo. And you cut to Guru Dutt's doing a drawing and working at home at night, and the radio is on, and the same next phrase comes on. I've never seen that in Indian cinema, that he's linking the two through a song on the radio.
Right.
I've never seen that. So you see very original ideas, little details of things. Very beautiful. When you were talking about Madhubala, I don't think people realize what an extraordinary comedian she is.
Right.
And in this film, you get this feeling, my God, she really can make you laugh.
Yes.
And she's obviously beautiful, but on top of that, she's a great actress. And I think that may have been helped if indeed her situation wasn't great then.
Right. I mean, I grew up watching Juhi Chawla in the 90s, and that same bubbly nature, the comedic timing, I was like, I can trace that right back to this the Madhubala character, which was in the 50s. So I think, she set the template for that bubbly Hindi film heroine, I think, right there, which was wonderful.
Yes.
But Pritam Aan Milo, I didn't know it was from this film, but...
It's actually a non-film song.
It's a non-film
It was
song.
sung in the 40s, I think, by C.H. Atma.
Okay.
And then they brought it in because it was in Bengal. C.H. Atma had recorded it.
Achha, okay.
So Guru Dutt had knew about that original, and they made it in this version.
I mean, my memory of that is from Gulzar's Angur, where the two characters have this code. When something goes wrong, they sing to each other, Pritam Aan Milo. So I was like, okay.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was that connection. But it's a non-film song to begin with, and obviously the Geeta Dutt version is beautiful.
Right.
It's a beautiful version. And Majru Saab's songs are also very beautiful. And the whole thing is, I think, what is very interesting is the first few minutes, there's no dialogue.
Right.
And they are just watching this tennis match.
Right.
And so that is all very kind of, in a way, very un-Indian cinema.
Right.
Because cinema is, as you will see, loaded with dialogue.
Right.
Everything has to be said. And whereas Mr. and Mrs. 55, there are lots of things that are unsaid. You have to figure it out. So I like that. And the whole relationship between Pritam and Johnny Walker and Hero is fantastic, where he's constantly ripping off his friend Johnny Walker, taking money from him, never returning his money. And one point when Johnny Walker and he are sharing a room or a flat or whatever, and Johnny Walker, Pritam has to go to the registrar to get married to Madhubala's, and Johnny Walker goes in for his shower, and he comes out and he realizes his suit has gone because Pritam has taken his clothes. So there's so many little touches.
There's such a funny line when Madhubala meets Pritam at the registrar's office, and she's unaware that this is the man she's getting married to, but they've met once or twice, so they're having some banter, and then I think the clerk calls her in and she tells him, "Zara 5 minute ruke, main shaadi karke aati hu," which was so funny.
Or something, like a jiffy. I'm married in a jiffy. And then there are lovely lines in it. Lovely lines in it. There's one little thing, when I had subtitled it for Channel 4, it was very difficult because there's very little time in which you translate, and in which the doctor comes to visit Pritam, and as you mentioned, and then he said, what's he ailing with? He said, unemployment. That's what the disease is. And then obviously Johnny Walker has to pay the doctor. So he gives him a note and he says, do to nahi? Now I thought, how do you manage to translate that in 1 second? He basically meant, did I give you 2 notes by mistake? Are they stuck together? But those are very witty little things. And the film is full of these kind of witticisms.
Okay, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about Guru Dutt cinema, and we'll discuss the categories, and we'll see you right after this break. Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcasts Network. On Cyrus Says, actor Richa Chadda returns to talk to Cyrus. They chat about her new Netflix original series Hira Mandi, the treatment of artists and performers historically, and Richa shares insights of her production company's achievements, including an award-winning film at the Sundance Film Festival. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam dives deep into the world of investments with Hiren Vaid, director and CIO at Alchemy Capital Management. Listen in to gain valuable insights on equities, the Indian market outlook, AIF versus mutual funds, sustainable long-term investments, and a lot more. Folks, if you like our shows, spread the word, tell your friends, and don't forget to rate and review them wherever you're listening to them. Follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You'll also find all our shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Omidyar Network India, IDFC First Bank, and ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund. Thank you for making this possible. And we're back on Has It Aged Well? I'm talking to the esteemed Nasreen Munni Kabir about Mr. and Mrs. 55, which is directed by Guru Dutt. Ma'am, I wanted to ask, of course, Guru Dutt is celebrated now as one of the pioneers of Indian cinema. Were his films commercially successful back then when he was making them? Or
to be honest, there was hit and miss.
Okay.
Some films are real flops, like Agas Ke Phool.
Right.
Now it's regarded as a cult film and a classic, but it was very, very bad. His most successful commercial film was actually not directed by him, but produced by him, and that was Chaudhary Ka Chand.
Okay.
That did very, very well. The others did well, but if you see Pyasa, it did well. But the same year, you have the release of Mother India.
Oh, okay.
A big film by Mehboob Saab with Nargis, and it won all the awards and everything. Yeah. So you would have been a small player in 1957.
Yes. Yeah.
So he was, I would regard, as not the top league.
Right.
He was not Bimal Roy, he was not Raj Kapoor, and he was not Mehboob Saab. He became Guru Dutt, I think, more or less after he passed away. Then he has an international... People who know world cinema love Guru Dutt. In France, in New York, I've met film critics who feel that his films should have been really regarded as world classics. And, for example, Time magazine has 100 best films ever, and there's one film by Satyajit Ray, and the other film is Pyasa. Now, because it's such an accomplished work. So in his lifetime, he did not get that recognition. And in a way, Pyasa talks about the fact that in your lifetime, you will not get recognition.
Yes. But do you think the fact that the West reveres him is because, like you said, that somewhat his filmmaking was influenced by what was happening in Hollywood at that time?
I don't think he was influenced only by Mr. and Mrs. 55. Do you see that influence? What they were very, very impressed by was his understanding of cinema, how to use the camera, how to use storytelling, how to integrate songs within the narrative. All these things means that you are continuing a tradition of cinema, which is Indian cinema, but you are bringing an authorship. You are bringing your stamp on it. It's like having a watermark. You could say Guru Dutt all over the shot. And if you see 5 minutes of a Guru Dutt film, you know it's him. How he positions with Murti Saab the camera, how they light it, how do the actors perform. Another important thing is that the Western audience like restrained performances. When you look at Western audience, what do they really like in world cinema? Whether it's Irani cinema or Korean cinema or French cinema, the first thing they like is good storytelling and restrained acting.
Okay.
And Indian cinema for them is a little loud.
Whereas I was about to say it's the opposite of restrained acting. Yes.
Opposite of restrained. And so that basically your film like Pyasa is very restrained.
Right.
And look at Wahida Ji's performance. Even Guru Dutt himself, it's a very quiet performance. And that is appealing. Plus, the way he uses songs is very appealing. And the fact that Sahir Saab wrote those songs, they say something. It's not just about romance, but if you see the song like Jinhe Naaz Hai or Ye Duniya Agar Bin Bhi Jaye, these are poetry. So that is why they like him. And he's got a very Guru Dutt, as you know, acts in his films, and in
Yeah.
Pyasa he looks extremely sensitive and a very fine performance.
But there's also a bit of like that rock star swagger in this film, especially in Mr. and Mrs. 55. There are scenes of him smoking, and I'm like, yeah, that's essentially a leading man if ever there was one, like this sort of carefree guy who's a cartoonist and he doesn't give a shit about the norms of society. Like you say, he's witty in his replies and he's smoking a cigarette and all of those things, and towards the end of the film he schemes this very elaborate thing where he'll photograph himself with two women so that the image of him as a playboy goes out. I want to just go back to, we spoke a little bit about this on the Cyrus episode also, where you would mention Bimal Roy, Guru Dutt and Raj Kapoor in the same breath, whereas years later now when I think of them, I think of Bimal Roy as the artsy filmmaker, Raj Kapoor as the commercial filmmaker, and Guru Dutt somewhere in between. So
And Mehboob Saab.
And Mehboob Saab, again, the epic grand scale, right? So were these demarcations as well defined back then, or is it just that for the convenience of historians and the film writers, we have made that distinction?
I would say I don't think they were so marked then.
Right.
Because Mehboob Saab belonged to a previous period. He was a studio man first. And so he was already older, and he was like a big shot.
Right.
And when Raj Kapoor came along, if you see Andaz is clearly shows Dilip Kumar and Raj Kapoor and Nargis. Brilliant film. That's a film you should revisit. And you'll see that Mehboob Saab belonged to the previous generation.
Right.
But when I started writing and studying, I put these four together. Maybe it was not quite correct, but I feel they belong, not so much because of their importance in commercially or artistically, but in terms of continuing a tradition of storytelling through Indian cinema. Each one brought something very unique, and there's a sense of authorship.
Right.
That interests me.
Okay.
If you see a shot and you see how the cameras use the sound and the music, and you say, this is so-and-so. What is authorship? Is that you hear the voice of that person, and the voice basically means the perspective on the world or the perspective on a story. And when you see that, you are really impressed. Why do people want to see Van Gogh, or they want to see, I don't know, M.F. Hussain or Raza? Because they can see a continuity of the character.
Right.
Atul Dodia is another person. You see the continuity of his thinking. And in cinema, you see that. And you take there's classical music. You see a wonderful singer and you hear how he approaches each rag differently. But what is in common is him, his personality and what he brings to it. And that is what you call authorship. How you claim and make something your own. And these four directors, in my view, of that era really did that.
Right.
Really did that.
But when you say Mehboob Khan was a studio man, what does that imply?
Because he started his career at Imperial, then he went to Sagar, and then he went to various different Sagar movie tone. He was at different studios till he started producing his own films.
Okay.
One thing we say is very important about all four is they produce their own films.
Right.
Now, when you produce their own films, you can impose your own style because
Right.
you're paying for it.
Yes.
But however, today, even if the stars are paying for it, there is, I wouldn't say there's a distinct style. Whereas if the budgets were different, but nevertheless, in the 50s, I'm sure you could buy a house for 1 lakh.
Right.
So if he was spending 5 lakhs, it's a fortune on a film. They say that Mother India was made for 8 lakhs. But 8 lakhs in the 50s could have bought you 5 houses.
Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is money was big at every time it's big.
Right.
Now it's crores, but in maybe 20 years, 200 crores may be peanuts. We don't know what will happen with inflation and money. But the fact is, when you put your own money in something, you call the shots
Right.
all the way.
Yes.
And these four did that.
Right.
And I remember reading an interview with Raj Saab in which his wife said, why don't we take this money, whatever he had made, and buy a house? He said, if you buy the house first, you'll never make a studio. But if you make a studio, you might buy a house.
Yes. So this film, in the opening credits, I see it's shot at Mehboob Studios. And you were saying that Mehboob Studios wouldn't allow outsiders to shoot.
Because Mehboob Saab had
So what's an outsider in this context?
Outsider would have been any production outside of Mehboob Khan's own production.
Got it.
So basically, when he bought the land in the early 50s and 52, I'm sure you haven't seen a film called Aan, but there's a wonderful...
I've heard about it.
There's a wonderful scene in which Dilip Kumar, looking dashing, is riding this horse and he comes into an arena, and that land became Mehboob's studio. And he bought that land and he would only make his own films there.
Right.
But he was very fond of Guru Dutt. There are writings and various about how fond he was. And apparently Mr. and Mrs. 55 was the first film he allowed to be shot there. And there's a famous shot in Kagaz Ke Phool near the end of the film when the character runs out of the studio and he's standing at one point near a wooden door. And if you go to Mehboob's studio, that is the main entrance to the studio.
Okay.
So you can see the things which are not sets.
Right.
It was Mehboob's studio.
But coming to these three filmmakers you spoke. So, like you said, Mehboob Khan was from a previous generation.
In terms of a style of filmmaking, I would put them together.
So the reason I was asking was like, why do you think the 50s was this boost of, like you said, authorship? Does it have anything to do with the fact that it's a post-independent world and for the first time we are making films for without,
yes. I'm sure it is, but it's also a turning point in which films became very much more modern in the way they were made. Starting with Andaz. That's why Mehboob Saab is in there. Mehboob Saab's Andaz was game-changing. If you ever see it, you'll see that the characters are very, very modern. The Achrekar's designs are totally modern, and you can see the reflection of those same designs in Awara. And you can see that the opulence of class division becomes very clear. And the villain in the 50s was the Zamindar, Bhiga Zameen, for example.
Yes.
In Guru Dutt, the society is the villain, but not a villain. The villain doesn't have a face. In Pyasa, for example. Even the publisher, played by Rahman, is not really a villain. But the fact of the matter is, he says the system is the villain. So it is about post-independence, but it's also about kind of independence of production, independence of storytelling. And when you are wanting to be creative and no one is restricting you, you're going to come up with great things. And I think apparently Guru Dutt was not a decisive filmmaker. So for Pyasa, he had to cast different people, and then he decided it wasn't working. He scrapped all those reels and started again. So these were not I think Mehboob Saab would be different, but our Raj Kapoor or Bimal Roy, but Guru Dutt was not decisive in the way the others were. It would be, finding out what to do, and he would ask his light boys and junior staff to comment on the films.
Oh, really?
They comment.
I read somewhere that the Madhubala role was offered to Vijayanti Mala at first, but she couldn't.
Mr.
In Mrs. 55,
I had not read that, but you could see in a way why, but I would say Madhubala shines.
Oh, she's wonderful. And she didn't work in any other Guru Dutt film after this?
No. Only one. And Meena Kumari was only one. That was Sahib Bibi. And who else was only one? Wahida Rahman was a constant. Shakila was also one. No, he kept changing. But he was the constant. And Johnny Walker.
Johnny Walker, yes. The true partner for Guru Dutt.
Of crime.
Yes.
True partner of crime he was. He was amazing. He's an amazing comedian. And in Mr. and Mrs. 55, he is absolutely brilliant. In that film and in Madhumati also, he's brilliant. Very funny.
I mean, the one thing stood out to me in Mr. and Mrs. 55 is, so I think little bit in Pyasa also you see that he definitely has a separate comedic track where it's like, he's going to come and he's going to crack some jokes. But in Mr. and Mrs. 55, he's your sidekick. He's not just there to crack jokes. There are scenes where he's actually making Pritam realize the fault of his ways. So he's also in a way...
He's conscious, and he's also he's also the very good friend who will bail him out, bail Pritam out no matter what's going on. And even if Pritam steals his clothes, he doesn't get angry with him. What can he say? He said, ye bhi ghaib or Pritam bhi ghaib. That's all he can say.
There's also a hilarious scene towards the end where Tuntun takes to the court, and I'm forgetting Tuntun's real name.
Uma Devi.
Uma Devi. and she gets into the
Yes.
Katera and Katgara, and it's hilarious when the lawyer is questioning her and she's talking about the incident where she encounters the two women. So yeah, I think she has very few scenes in the film, but she's also one of those actresses I remember. She's just so funny when she comes on screen, and
Yes. And she, Uma Devi, I mean, Tuntun and Johnny Walker were a great combination.
a great combination, yes. I often wonder again, because they were, I mean, Uma Devi more so because of her gender, she was typecast into this one fat woman comedic role. So I wonder if, times were different and she would actually get to play something more than just that. That would have been.
That we don't know, but she started off as a playback singer.
Oh, really?
She's a playback singer, Uma
Okay.
Devi, and she sang very famous songs. But the other thing is, you have to say that there is a lot of kind of cliches of casting.
Yes.
The fat person, the one who is not, who's a bit crazy. There are a lot of. Now you can't do all that. And that is true of Hollywood. That's true of every cinema.
Yes.
You cannot make fun of people
Yeah.
in the same way as you did in those days.
Anything else you want to talk about, ma'am, from Mr.
I
and
would
Mrs.
say that
55?
anybody who hasn't seen it, I think it'll be an amazing surprise.
Okay.
It'll be an amazing surprise because I don't think there's a film in Indian cinema history that is as witty as Mr. and Mrs. 55.
Okay.
And I would challenge anybody today to write that kind of dialogue. They could not.
Right.
The friendship between the hero and the comedian, they couldn't write that subtlety. And it's not dated. It's a friendship which is valid today as then, and yet the writing was so good. And the way it's filmed, I must tell you again, I think we discussed it about with Cyrus, but it's true of even Mr. and Mrs. 55, and which I had asked Majru Saab, why are his songs, Guru Dutt's songs seem so integrated in the dialogue? And Majru Saab said because he would immediately cut from the dialogue to the opening line of the song. So the first time we hear Pritam in Mr. and Mrs. 55 is in song.
Right.
He goes to there's a whole scene, we don't see him. He goes to the cafe and then Johnny Walker comes in and says, where the hell have you been? I've been looking for you all day. And then he says, तुम्हें क्या हुआ है? And he said, अजी दिल पे हुआ ऐसा जादू.
Right.
So he answers in song. And that's the first time he opens his mouth.
Right.
So basically, because there's no introductory music, the connection goes seamlessly.
Right.
You don't get the feeling the song is forced in
Correct. Yeah.
Everything about that film, I mean, I could go on and on, but it is really subtle. It's very subtle. And I think subtlety is slightly rare in comedy in Indian film.
Yeah.
And performances, they were really lovely performances. And I think, I don't know, I just think it's one of the gems of Hindi cinema.
Actually, I want to ask you, why do you think, I mean, comedies are rare, good comedies are rare to come by now? And talking primarily about Hindi cinema.
Which one would you say is a good
I mean,
comedy?
the last film I saw, which I thought was genuinely funny, was a film called Stree. Which was, I think,
didn't see it,
2 years ago.
Was
2 or
it
3.
about a ghost?
Yes. So there's this rumor goes around that there's a female ghost going around, and then there's a lot of hijinks that ensue. But that was the last film, and that's also, I think, some 2017 or 18. I think that's like 5 or 6 years ago, which was, I think, was a genuinely funny film. But like coming back to the idea of wit, do you think wit and language are very interrelated?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like Orson Welles is regarded as very witty,
Right.
but it's mainly his language, you know, and so therefore you find that
So do you think degradation in language leads to degradation of wit?
dedication language in terms of the writers not applying wit is there. Somewhat with the audience, because even today, if you play that film, everyone will get the jokes.
Yeah.
So it's not the audience who has the problem.
Yes.
And, you know, they would get every joke of Johnny Walker's.
Right.
But it is actually the writers who don't think on those lines. You know, maybe they don't think of those situations in films.
Do you think film writers have gotten lazy now?
I don't know how much freedom they have.
Okay.
I don't know who has freedom anymore. You tell me in Indian cinema. It looks
That's a
like
good
the star.
question.
The star is calling lots of shots.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
he's not multi-skilled, or she's not multi-skilled.
Right. That's the other thing that happened. I think that the hero became the comedian, where he
Amitabh
had to.
Bachchan was very good
Yes.
in Amar Akbar Anthony.
Yes. Yeah, but I think that's one of the reasons why I think we probably don't make as many comedies anymore.
And there are very few sub characters in Hindi films today. You don't see, in the old days, you used to see the driver, the cook. They were all
Yes.
funny characters.
Yes.
Now you don't see any driver, any cook. You don't see anybody of the working class within the family as an
Yeah.
integral part of the family.
Yeah, I mean, if they are, then the film is about them, or it's about the other side. I mean, so
Yes.
yeah.
Tell me, which is the last film you saw? I want to know.
Oh, I saw Crew, the film with Kareena
yes.
Kapoor.
Now,
Tabu,
that's a funny film.
And that's a funny film, yes. I quite enjoyed it. Though, you know what I thought was a little ironic was that for a film that's critical of capitalist greed, there was product placement in every frame of the film. So I thought you're pretty much defeating your own
Yes.
purpose.
But it was a witty film.
It was a witty film, yes.
That's a witty film.
Yes.
And I think it was a very feminist film without it being heavy-handedly so.
Right.
And I thought the girls involved, they looked like they were having great time.
Fun, yes.
They were having fun.
Somebody pointed out that a friend of mine that in the film, and slight spoilers for Crew, but the police start doubting these women that something is going wrong when they start having fun at their job.
Yes.
So yeah, that's
Yes.
as long as you're miserable in your job, people think everything's normal. The moment someone starts enjoying themselves.
But I think also what is very interesting is I think this Diljit character.
Dosanjh, yes,
he's
yes,
unbelievably good.
Right.
And Chamkila he's amazing,
Right.
and he's got a fantastic presence on the screen and something fresh.
Yes.
Really, I see him as the big star
Right. I think it
of
comes
this era. Him.
the fact that he's a live performer, he performs in concerts. I think he has that charisma to hold the
Yes,
audience.
he's got that,
Yeah.
and he's very rooted as well.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
could feel he's rooted in wherever he's from. He belongs there, and he knows what to do with it. And the camera loves him. The camera loves him.
Okay. I just want to come back to Mr. and Mrs. 55. So, ma'am, what do you think from Mr. and Mrs. 5 has aged the best and what has not aged so
I'd
well?
say the wit has aged very, very well. The performances very well, and the shot taking.
Okay.
Oh, beautiful shot taking. I think in every aspect, the only thing that has not aged well
Right.
is the question of feminism
Right.
and the question of women and their role in society. I
Yeah,
think that has aged very poorly,
Right.
and that is a little embarrassing when you
Right,
see the
right.
film. But beyond that, if you look at the other aspects, I think it has aged beautifully. And how would you define a film that ages well?
That's a great question. That's something we battle with every episode, because like you said, if a film encapsulates the time it was made in, does that mean it has aged well? Because of course the piece of art is frozen in time. So if it gives you an idea of what the thinking was in the 50s, has it aged well? I don't know. I don't have an answer. I think that, like you said, if there's a fair balance between, like you said, you can see that the intention and the objectives of the people making and writing the film are good. I mean, the other thing I forgot to bring up is that even though it's a film that deals with gender politics and feminism, the writers and makers are all primarily men. So there's always that the gaze and the place where they come from will be a certain way. I wonder if they took advice from the women in their life while writing this film.
Doubt it.
Yeah.
I really doubt it.
Yeah.
I don't think even Madhubala would have questioned it.
Correct. Yeah.
In that scene with the sister-in-law, I
Right.
doubt it.
Right.
And the sister-in-law is Kumkum. I doubt if they
Right.
would have at all.
Yeah.
But for me, I think whether a film ages or not is to do with the fact that it should have a universal understanding of character
Right.
and performance. The performance is very key. If somebody is too dramatic or too melodramatic, it will date very quickly. And I would say the universality of themes, the friendships, the love, all of that has to be universally appealing. Then
Right.
it doesn't date so much. And that if they are bringing up certain amount of psychological behavior of people, that doesn't date. So why do people still talk about Singing in the Rain or Mother India or whatever? Because the way the characters have been written psychologically is true even today.
Correct.
So then audiences have to find a way of identifying one aspect of that film for it not to date for the audiences.
Okay.
And in a way, that could be one of the ways of looking at it.
All right. If you had to program a double feature with Mr. and Mrs. 55, which film would you pair with it?
That's a very good question and a very difficult one. You want a modern film?
Yeah, it would be great if it's a modern
I would
film.
put Some Like It Hot.
Oh, okay.
I think that would be very interesting.
Okay.
Because it's also full of wit
Right.
and mad circumstances.
Right.
And Billy Wilder's writing. And you have this. So the two together would be a very interesting mix.
And if you had to pick a Hindi film?
That would be very tough. But I would say, let us think, maybe some mad film like Parosan.
Oh, okay.
Because you have to see how comedy is dealt
Yes,
with in
yes.
two eras.
Yeah.
You know, something a little crazy. But I'd say Some Like It Hot would be a better match.
Okay.
Because you have Madhubala and you have Marilyn Monroe.
Monroe, yes. Match made in heaven.
And you have the friends.
Right.
Tony Curtis is Pritham. And the friend, our dear Jack Lemmon,
Yeah,
is Johnny Walker.
is Johnny Walker, yeah.
So you've got the balances working.
Over there, yes, nice. Cool, okay, ma'am. So, Mr. and Mrs. 55, if you had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, on a has it aged well scale, 10 being it's aged wonderfully and stands the test of time, 1 being it hasn't aged well and is pretty much irrelevant, how much would you score?
I would say 9, simply because of the feminist problem.
Right.
Otherwise, I would have given it 10.
Okay. I would give it an 8 perhaps.
That's high for you.
That's it is. I remember, maybe because I have a more of a affiliation with Pyasa, because I watched it in college, and that was my introduction to Guru Dutt, and I remember it being more of a impact on me, because like you said, the songs like Jinhe Naaz Hai and couple of the songs from Pyasa are very well picturized, and I think they're still as relevant. So just as compared to...
Yes, you see, the thing is, Pyasa makes you think,
Yeah.
and Mr. and Mrs. 55 makes you smile.
Makes you
So
smile.
it depends on your mood.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking time out
you're
and
most
doing this
welcome.
with me. I just want to hold up the book, which is right here. It's called Guru Dutt, A Life in Cinema, which is written by ma'am. And you also have another book about letters of Guru Dutt.
It was Letters of Guru Dutt writing to his wife Geeta. That was
Right.
the second book. And the third book was a book about the dialogue of Pyasa.
Right.
The entire
Yes.
dialogue of Pyasa, and
Yes.
a lot of notes on Pyasa. And next
What
year...
I love about that book
Yes.
is that you have the Urdu script, you have the Hindi script, and you have the English script.
So you
which
want
is
to encourage people to learn Urdu or
Yes.
Devanagari, and there's English translation.
Right.
The other thing is, next year will be 100 years of Guru Dutt's birth, and so
Right.
I'm going to take out a diary. I did a diary for Sahir Saab, and now I'm going to do a diary for Guru Dutt, which will come out at the end of the year. So Abbas,
Yes.
start saving.
Please. I'll start saving, and we'd love to have you again when that book comes out. So we'll look out for that. Anything you want to give out? Anything you want to ask people to follow or something?
I would say they must follow you because you... No, not because of you necessarily, but because you are talking about films they should not forget.
Right.
And if anybody is interested in cinema, you can't forget history.
That's true.
Cinema didn't start last week.
That's true.
And so if you don't understand what it came before,
Yeah.
you're going to understand everything very superficially.
Okay.
And so I like the fact you do these kind of shows,
Thank you so
because
much.
whether they watch it or not, they can't pretend they don't know about it.
Right. Actually, let me put you on the spot. So if you had to recommend 3 films from yesteryear, which you
Can
think...
I mention 4?
Yes, please.
Or maybe 5. Okay, I would say definitely Pyasa. You have
Okay.
to, if it's that limited.
Right.
Do Bhiga Zameen,
Okay.
Mother India,
Mm-hmm.
Mother India or Andaz,
Okay.
Avara or Shri 420.
Okay.
So you've covered Raj Kapoor, Mehboob Saab,
And
Guru Dutt. and Bimal Roy.
Vimal Roy, yes. But yes, please check out all the books that ma'am has written. My favorite was Jia Jale, which was about the lyrics of Gulzar. And I think every book that she's written is a fount of knowledge. So do check that out. Check out the Cyrus episode we did with ma'am. We'll put the link in the description. And once again, thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. And this was amazing. All the people who'd been asking for a Guru Dutt film, we finally done one. The reason I'm a little scared touching those because, like I said, it's way before my generation. So sometimes I might fumble on the names, on some of the historical facts. But that's why we were honored to have you, because I know if I go wrong, like I just did a couple of minutes ago, I'll be put in my place. So thank you so much again, ma'am. And for those of you who stuck around till the very end, please subscribe to the IVM Pop channel. And we'll see you next week with a new guest and a new film. Thank you so much for sticking around. Bye bye.
IVM.